The dust kicked up against her skirts as the morning sun cast long shadows across the barren road leading out of Malad City, Idaho. Sarah Blackburn stood at the edge of town, her valise clutched tightly in one hand, the other shielding her eyes from the harsh light as she looked back at the collection of wooden buildings that had been her home for the past 3 years. The weight of her decision pressed upon her shoulders as heavily as the summer heat. Second thoughts. The deep voice startled her. Quentin Atwood sat atop his chestnut mare, his worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes, but not quite hiding the intensity of his gaze. Sarah straightened her spine, refusing to show the tremor she felt at his sudden appearance. "No, Mr. Atwood, no second thoughts, just saying goodbye." It was 1876, and the West was still wild, untamed, and full of promise. For Sarah, that promise had faded over the years she'd spent as a schoolteacher in Malad City. She'd come with dreams as vast as the Idaho sky, only to find them shrinking with each passing season. Quentin dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the dirt. At 32, he'd earned every line on his sun-weathered face, every callus on his hands. The local rancher wasn't known for his words, but rather for his actions, fair dealings, hard work, and a steadfast reliability that had earned him respect throughout the county. "The stage isn't due for another hour," he said, leading his horse closer. "Mind if I ask where you're headed?" Sarah's grip tightened on her valise. "San Francisco. My sister wrote that there are opportunities for women there. Teaching positions with actual resources, not just a room with a few tattered books." Quentin nodded, his expression unreadable. "Malad City will miss its schoolteacher." "Will it?" Sarah couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. 3 years, Mr. Atwood. 3 years of teaching children in a leaky building, fighting for every penny from the town council, watching families move on when times get hard. The events of the previous week still stung the town council's refusal to repair the schoolhouse roof before winter, claiming insufficient funds while somehow finding money to expand the saloon. It had been the final push she needed to answer her sister's letters. "Some of us notice the good you've done," Quentin said quietly. The sincerity in his voice made Sarah look up, really look at him for perhaps the first time. She'd seen Quentin Atwood around town since her arrival at church on Sundays, occasionally in the general store, and twice a year when he brought his ranch hands' children for their examinations. He'd always been polite but distant, a man of few words who kept to himself. "I appreciate that, Mr. Atwood, but appreciation doesn't fix a leaking roof or buy new primers." Sarah sighed, glancing down the empty road that stretched toward the horizon. "I came west because I believed I could make a difference. Now I'm not sure that was ever possible." Quentin's weathered hand reached out, gesturing toward town. "May I walk with you? Perhaps get you a coffee at Mrs. Peterson's cafe before the stage arrives." Sarah hesitated. She'd planned these final moments alone, a clean break from Malad City. But something in Quentin's steady gaze made her nod. "That would be fine, thank you." They walked in silence back toward town, Quentin leading his mare. The morning was warming quickly, promising another scorching day. Main Street was beginning to stir, the blacksmith already at his forge, merchants sweeping their storefronts, a couple of ranch hands emerging bleary-eyed from the saloon after a night of cards. Mrs. Peterson's cafe sat between the general store and the telegraph office, its blue-checked curtains a cheerful touch amid the town's weathered buildings. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and the plump proprietress looked up from behind the counter. "Well now, Miss Blackburn. Thought you'd be halfway to the stage, stop by now." Her eyes darted curiously between Sarah and Quentin. "Just waiting for the stage, Mrs. Peterson," Sarah replied, settling at a small table by the window. Mr. Atwood kindly suggested coffee while I wait. Quentin secured his horse outside and joined her, removing his hat and placing it on the empty chair beside him. His hair, dark with flecks of silver at the temples, was pressed flat from the hat, giving him a strangely vulnerable appearance. Mrs. Peterson brought over 2 steaming cups. "On the house, dear. Lord knows you've put up with enough in this town to earn a parting cup." When they were alone again, Quentin wrapped his calloused hands around the mug. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Blackburn." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A proposition?" "Not like that," he clarified quickly, a rare flush coloring his tanned face. "A business proposition. I've been meaning to speak with you about it for some time." Sarah sipped her coffee, curiosity overcoming her impatience to be gone. "I'm listening." "I have 26 workers on my ranch," Quentin began, his voice low and serious. "Half have families. Between them, 17 children who need schooling. They ride into town when they can, but it's a long way, especially in winter." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've been thinking of building a schoolhouse on my property. Nothing fancy, but solid. Proper roof, proper stove, proper books." Sarah blinked, surprised by this unexpected turn. "And you want me to recommend someone?" Quentin met her gaze directly. "I want you to consider staying on as the teacher. I can offer fair wages, better than the town pays, and living quarters. A small house, just behind the main one. It was my mother's place before she passed." The proposition hung between them, unexpected and jarring against Sarah's carefully laid plans. "Why would you do this?" "Because education matters," he said simply. "My father couldn't read or write, worked himself to death without ever being able to check if the cattle buyers were cheating him. My mother taught me different. I want those children to have a chance." Sarah studied him, searching for ulterior motives but finding only sincerity. "It's a generous offer, Mr. Atwood, but I've made arrangements. My sister is expecting me." Quentin nodded, disappointment briefly crossing his features before his expression returned to its usual stoicism. "Of course. It was just a thought." They finished their coffee in silence. Outside, the town was fully awake now, the sounds of commerce and conversation filtering through the cafe windows. Sarah found herself seeing Malad City through new eyes, not as the place that had failed her, but as a community still finding its way, just as she was. "May I ask you something, Mr. Atwood?" Sarah set down her empty cup. "Quentin, please, and yes." "Why wait until I'm leaving town to make this offer?" He looked down, turning his cup slowly between his hands. "I'm not good with words, Miss Blackburn. Takes me time to find them. Been thinking about this schoolhouse idea for months, but couldn't seem to approach you properly." A faint smile touched his lips. "Saw you standing at the edge of town this morning and knew it was now or never." There was something disarming about his honesty, about the way he admitted his own shortcomings without shame. It stood in stark contrast to the town councilmen with their empty promises and self-important posturing. The clock on the cafe wall showed nearly 9:30. The stage would be arriving soon. "I should get to the station," Sarah said, standing and smoothing her skirts. Quentin rose as well, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll walk you." The stage depot was on the far end of town, a simple wooden platform with a small office attached. A few other travelers were already waiting, a salesman with his sample cases, an elderly couple, and a young man who looked like he might be heading to the mining territories further north. Sarah handed her ticket to the depot manager, who nodded and added her name to his list. "Stage is running about 20 minutes late. Had some trouble at the river crossing, but should be here soon." Quentin stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand, seemingly content to wait with her in silence. Sarah found herself studying his profile, the strong jaw, the straight nose that looked like it might have been broken once, the lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and weather. "What made you stay?" she asked suddenly. He turned to her, brow furrowed in question. "In Malad City," she clarified. "What made you put down roots here when so many move on?" Quentin considered the question. "The land, I suppose. When I first saw that valley, something in me knew it was where I belonged." He gestured toward the mountains visible beyond the town. "My ranch is in those foothills. First morning I woke there, watched the sun come up over those peaks, I knew I was home." There was passion in his voice, a depth of feeling that surprised her. This taciturn man, who chose his words so carefully, spoke about his land with the eloquence of a poet. "That kind of belonging. It's rare," Sarah said softly. "Yes." His eyes met hers. "Rare and worth fighting for." A commotion down the street drew their attention. The stagecoach was arriving in a cloud of dust, the team of 6 horses trotting wearily into town. It would be leaving again within 30 minutes, just enough time to change horses, let passengers stretch their legs, and load mail. Sarah felt a sudden weight in her chest. This was at her departure from a chapter of her life that, despite its disappointments, had shaped her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Would you show me?" The words escaped before she fully formed the thought. Quentin looked puzzled. "Show you your ranch. The place where you'd build this schoolhouse." Sarah surprised herself with the request. "Before I decide." Hope flickered across his face before he schooled his expression. "It's a 2-hour ride. You'd miss your stage. There will be another in 3 days." Sarah wasn't sure what was driving her curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "If your offer is genuine, I should at least see what I'd be agreeing to." "The offer is genuine." Quentin's voice was firm. "But are you sure? Your sister is expecting you." Sarah glanced at the stage, then back to Quentin. "I can send a telegram. Tell her I've been delayed." While Sarah sent her telegram, Quentin arranged to rent a gentle mare from the livery stable. The telegraph operator promised to send her message immediately, and within the hour they were riding out of Malad City, Sarah's valise secured behind Quentin's saddle. The day had grown hot, but as they rode higher into the foothills, a pleasant breeze cooled the air. The landscape transformed around them from the dry, flat land near town to rolling hills, dotted with pines and aspens. Wildflowers bloomed in surprising bursts of color, and twice they startled deer from the brush. Quentin rode slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming plants and birds they passed. Sarah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the tension of the past weeks gradually easing from her shoulders. "Just over this ridge," Quentin called back, gesturing to a rise ahead. When they crested the hill, Sarah reined her horse to a stop, taking in the vista below. A wide valley stretched before them, sheltered on 3 sides by forested mountains. A creek cut through the center, its banks lined with cottonwoods. Nestled against the far hillside sat the ranch buildings, a large 2-story house built of solid timber, several barns and outbuildings, corrals, and beyond them, cattle grazing in lush pastures. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed. Quentin nodded, pride evident in his posture. 15 years of work. Started with just 50 acres and a 1-room cabin. Now it's 3,000 acres and the main breeding operation for 3 counties. They rode down into the valley, following a well-maintained road. As they approached the ranch buildings, Sarah noticed details she couldn't see from a distance: the vegetable garden beside the house, flower beds beneath windows, a grape arbor creating shade over a side porch. This wasn't just a working ranch, it was a home, carefully tended and loved. Workers called greetings as they rode in, and Quentin responded to each by name, asking after families or commenting on work in progress. Several children ran out to watch them arrive, their faces curious at the sight of their employer returning with the town's schoolteacher, Miss Blackburn. A boy of about 10 recognized her. "Are you coming to live at the Diamond, eh?" Before Sarah could respond, a woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on an apron. In her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, she had the weathered look of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the elements. "Rosa, this is Miss Sarah Blackburn from town," Quentin introduced them as he helped Sarah dismount. "Miss Blackburn, this is Rosa Hernandez, my housekeeper and the closest thing to a saint you'll find in Idaho territory." Rosa snorted at this description but smiled warmly at Sarah. "Welcome to Diamond, Miss Blackburn. You staying for supper?" "Miss Blackburn is considering a proposal to teach school here at the ranch," Quentin explained. "I'd like to show her where we might build it and the cottage where she would stay." Rosa's eyes lit with understanding. "About time," she muttered, then louder. "I'll have refreshments ready when you're done showing her around." The tour began with the main house, a spacious, well-built structure with large windows and surprisingly elegant furnishings. The main floor held a formal parlor, dining room, kitchen, and Quentin's study. Upstairs were bedrooms, currently used only by Quentin and occasionally guests. "My father built the core of this house," Quentin explained as they walked through the study lined with books far more than Sarah would have expected. "I've added to it over the years." Next, they visited the working parts of the ranch, the barns, the blacksmith shop, the bunkhouse where single workers lived. Everywhere they went, Sarah noted the same attention to detail, the same solid construction and thoughtful design. "And here," Quentin said finally, leading her to a small clearing about 100 yards from the main house, "is where I thought to build the school." The spot was perfect level ground, protected from harsh winds by a stand of pines, with a view down the valley. Sarah could easily imagine a schoolhouse here, with windows to catch the morning light and perhaps a small bell tower. "The cottage I mentioned is just over there." Quentin pointed to a small house partially hidden by aspens. "My mother lived there after my father died. She liked her independence, but wanted to stay close." The cottage proved to be a delightful surprise: 2 bedrooms, a sitting room with a fireplace, a compact kitchen, and a small back porch overlooking a private garden. Though it had been unoccupied for some time, it was clean and well maintained, with simple but quality furnishings. "It would be yours to arrange as you please," Quentin said, standing awkwardly in the doorway as Sarah explored. "The garden, too. My mother grew herbs and flowers there." Sarah ran her hand along a bookshelf, trying to imagine herself living in this peaceful space, teaching in a schoolhouse built specifically for that purpose, becoming part of this thriving community that Quentin had created. It was a far cry from the future she'd envisioned in San Francisco, and yet there was something compelling about it. "And the terms of employment?" she asked, turning to face him. Quentin named a salary that made her eyebrows rise, nearly double what the town had paid her. "Plus the cottage, of course. Food from the ranch gardens and meat from our stock. 2 days off each week and school holidays as you see fit within reason. I'd provide all necessary books and supplies. And my duties, teaching primarily. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, science, whatever you believe important. The children range from 5 to 15. Some have had regular schooling before, others barely any." He paused. "Beyond that, I'd ask you to join us for Sunday services. We have them here rather than riding to town, and perhaps occasional social gatherings. The ranch families become close, especially through the winter months. Sarah nodded, processing this information. And my independence. Would I be free to come and go as I please, to receive visitors, to have my own life separate from my role as teacher? A flash of something respect perhaps crossed Quentin's face. Of course. The cottage would be your home, not just your lodging. Your personal life would be your own affair. They returned to the main house, where Rosa had prepared lemonade and fresh baked cookies. As they sat on the wide front porch, Sarah found herself relaxing into easy conversation with both Quentin and Rosa, learning about the rhythm of ranch life, the families who worked there, the challenges and joys of this remote but beautiful place. As the afternoon waned, Sarah realized she hadn't thought about San Francisco in hours. The more she learned about Diamond, a ranch, the more she could envision herself here, not just for a few months or a year, but perhaps longer. "I've kept you too long," Quentin said as the sun began to dip toward the mountains. "We should start back if you're to reach town before dark." "Actually," Sarah said, making her decision in that moment, "if the offer still stands, I'd like to accept the position." Quentin's eyes widened slightly, the only indication of his surprise. "You're certain? What about San Francisco?" "San Francisco will still be there if this doesn't work out," Sarah replied. "But I came west to make a difference, Mr. Atwood." "Quentin, I think perhaps I can do that here with proper support and resources." A slow smile spread across Quentin's face, transforming his features. "Well then, Miss Blackburn, welcome to Diamond, a ranch." Rosa, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, let out a pleased "gracias a Dios" and hurried inside, presumably to prepare a celebration dinner. They agreed that Sarah would return to town the next day to collect her remaining belongings and formally resign from her position. The school council would undoubtedly be displeased, but with only 3 weeks until the fall term was to begin, they would have little choice but to accept her decision. That evening, Sarah dined with Quentin in the formal dining room, joined by Rosa and Quentin's foreman, Miguel Hernandez, Rosa's husband, and their daughter Elena. The conversation flowed easily, centering on plans for the schoolhouse which students might attend and what supplies would be needed. "The men can start clearing the site tomorrow," Miguel offered. "We have enough timber seasoning in the barn to begin construction right away. If we all work together, the building could be ready by the time the first snow flies," Quentin added. "In the meantime, we could use the front room of the bunkhouse for classes." Sarah found herself caught up in their enthusiasm, adding her own suggestions and requirements. By the time dessert was served, Rosa's exceptional apple pie, they had the beginnings of a solid plan. After dinner, Quentin walked Sarah to the cottage, where Rosa had already lit lamps and built a small fire to ward off the evening chill. "It's not too late to change your mind," he said quietly as they stood on the porch. "I would understand." Sarah looked up at him, noting how the lamplight softened his weathered features. "Why do I feel you'd be disappointed if I did?" Quentin's gaze dropped momentarily before meeting hers again. "I respect your decision either way, but yes, I would be disappointed." He hesitated, then added, "The ranch needs a school, the children need a teacher, and perhaps I've grown tired of an empty house." The admission hung between them, simple but laden with meaning. Sarah felt a flutter of something warm in her chest, not romance, not yet, but possibility. This man was a stranger in many ways, and yet there was something about him that resonated with her own heart. "Good night, Quentin," she said softly. "Thank you for the opportunity." "Good night, Sarah," he replied, the first time he'd used her given name. "Sleep well." The next morning, Quentin and Sarah rode back to Malad City. The return journey seemed shorter somehow, filled with conversation about the ranch, its history, and Quentin's plans for its future. Sarah found herself increasingly impressed by his thoughtfulness and vision. In town, Sarah's resignation caused exactly the stir she'd anticipated. The mayor himself came to her boarding house, alternately cajoling and scolding her for leaving them in such a predicament. When he realized she wouldn't be swayed, he switched tactics, suggesting that Quentin had somehow coerced or improperly influenced her. "Mr. Atwood has offered me a position with fair pay, proper working conditions, and respect for my expertise," Sarah replied coolly. "If the town council had shown similar regard for education, perhaps I would be staying." The mayor left in a huff, but not before warning her that she'd regret throwing in her lot with that solitary rancher who barely speaks to decent folk. Sarah's landlady, Mrs. Finch, proved more understanding. "Can't say I blame you, dear. That Quentin Atwood is a good man for all he keeps to himself. Built that ranch from nothing, treats his workers fair, never heard a whisper against his character." By mid-afternoon, Sarah had packed her remaining belongings, mostly books, some personal mementos, and additional clothing, into 2 trunks. Quentin arranged for them to be transported to the ranch by wagon the following day. "Is there anywhere else you need to go before we leave town?" Quentin asked as they prepared to depart. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "The schoolhouse. I'd like to collect a few things that are mine and say goodbye, I suppose." The small, weathered building at the edge of town looked forlorn in the afternoon light. Inside, the single room held 8 rough-hewn desks, a larger desk for the teacher, a blackboard, and a few bookshelves sparsely populated with worn texts. The roof leaked in 3 places, marked by stained patches on the plank floor. Sarah moved about the room, gathering her personal books, a hand-stitched cushion for her chair, and a small collection of rocks and pressed flowers she used for nature lessons. These she placed carefully in a basket Quentin carried for her. At her desk, she paused, running her fingers over the smooth spot worn by 3 years of lesson planning and grading. For all its shortcomings, she had loved teaching here. Had loved watching understanding dawn in young eyes, had cherished the small victories when a struggling child finally mastered a difficult concept. "Second thoughts?" Quentin asked softly from the doorway, echoing his question from that morning. Sarah looked up, a smile forming despite the melancholy moment. "No, just acknowledging that even imperfect chapters of our lives deserve proper endings." Quentin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need." When Sarah finally emerged from the schoolhouse, she closed the door firmly behind her, symbolically closing that chapter of her life. She felt lighter somehow, ready for the new beginning that awaited her. As they rode out of Malad City for the second time, Sarah didn't look back. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to Miguel's word, construction on the schoolhouse began immediately. Sarah split her time between preparing for classes, settling into her cottage, and consulting on the schoolhouse design. In the evenings, she often found herself on the main house porch with Quentin, sharing a cup of coffee and conversation as the day cooled into night. She learned more about him during these quiet conversations: how he'd come west as a boy with his parents, how his father had died when Quentin was 17, leaving him and his mother to run the fledgling ranch, how he'd worked alongside seasoned hands, learning everything he could, making mistakes but never the same one twice, how he'd slowly expanded, acre by acre, building something substantial and lasting. In turn, she shared her own history growing up in Boston with scholarly parents, following her father's footsteps into education, but feeling stifled by the rigid conventions of Eastern schools. how she dreamed of bringing knowledge to places that needed it most, and how that dream had led her west at 23, full of idealism that had gradually eroded against the hard realities of frontier life. "And yet you stayed 3 years," Quentin observed one evening. "Many leave after the first winter." Sarah smiled, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "I'm stubborn. My father always said it would either be my downfall or my salvation. And which has it been?" She considered the question seriously. "Both, I think. Stubbornness kept me in a situation that was wearing me down, but it also gave me the strength to demand better, even if that meant walking away." Quentin's gaze was warm as it rested on her profile. "I'm grateful for your stubbornness, then." Such moments became more frequent, brief touches of hands when passing objects, lingering glances, conversations that deepened beyond the practical matters of school and ranch. Sarah found herself looking forward to their evenings together, to discovering new facets of this quiet, thoughtful man who'd offered her an unexpected path. Word spread about the school at Diamond, a ranch. Within days of Sarah's decision, parents from neighboring homesteads rode in to inquire whether their children might attend. By the time classes began in the temporary space, Sarah had 23 students ranging from 5 to 16 years old. The schoolhouse construction progressed rapidly. Quentin spared no expense, insisting on quality materials and craftsmanship. Large windows to catch the light, a proper stove for heating, built-in bookshelves, individual desks that could be moved for different activities. Every detail was considered and executed with care. On a crisp September morning, Sarah stood with Quentin at the building site, watching as workers raised the frame for the roof. "It's really happening," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "Did you doubt it would?" Quentin asked, glancing down at her. "Not exactly doubt, just—" "I've grown accustomed to promises that never materialize." Quentin's expression grew serious. "I don't make promises lightly, Sarah. I'm beginning to understand that." She met his gaze steadily. "It's a rare quality." A call from one of the workers interrupted the moment, and Quentin moved away to consult on some detail of construction. Sarah watched him go, aware of a growing warmth in her chest whenever they were together. It wasn't just gratitude for the opportunity he'd given her, though that was certainly part of it. There was something more, a recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit beneath their apparent differences. As September eased into October, the Diamond settled into a rhythm that included school 5 days a week. Sarah found herself thriving in this new environment, with students eager to learn and parents who valued education enough to spare their children from farm work during school hours. Her temporary classroom in the bunkhouse's front room was crowded but functional, and the children's progress was remarkable. Quentin often found reasons to stop by during lessons, bringing fresh apples from the orchard, delivering a new map he'd ordered from Denver, or simply pausing in the doorway to listen as Sarah led a discussion on American history or demonstrated a science concept. His presence might have been distracting, but Sarah found it reassuring, instead tangible proof that her work was valued. On a Saturday in mid-October, Quentin invited Sarah to ride with him to the high pastures, where some of his prize breeding stock grazed during the warmer months. They would soon be bringing the cattle down to lower elevations before winter set in, and he wanted her to see this aspect of ranch operations. The day dawned clear and cool, perfect for riding. Quentin had a picnic basket packed by Rosa, and they set out after breakfast, taking a trail that wound up through pine forests and across alpine meadows still green despite the advancing season. The ride took most of the morning, with Quentin pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the land. When they reached the high meadow, Sarah gasped at the panoramic view, mountains stretching in all directions, the valley of the Diamond visible far below, and closer at hand, sleek cattle grazing contentedly in lush grass. "It's like something from a painting," she said as they dismounted near a clear stream. Quentin smiled, pleased by her reaction. "This is my favorite place on the ranch. I come up here when I need to think, or just to remember why all the hard work matters." They spread a blanket beside the stream and unpacked Rosa's generous lunch: fried chicken, biscuits, pickled vegetables, and apple tarts. As they ate, Quentin explained his breeding program, his voice animated as he described his vision for improving his herd. "You truly love this, don't you?" Sarah observed. "Not just the result, but the process, the careful planning, the patience required." Quentin nodded, his expression thoughtful. "There's satisfaction in seeing something grow and improve under your care, whether it's cattle or crops or—" He hesitated. "Or children's minds," Sarah finished for him. "Yes." His eyes met hers. "We're not so different, you and I. We're both builders in our own ways." The observation startled her with its insight. She had never thought of teaching as building, but of course it was constructing knowledge, laying foundations for future understanding, creating structures of thought that would support a lifetime of learning. After lunch, they walked among the cattle, Quentin explaining the characteristics he looked for and how he tracked bloodlines. Sarah found herself fascinated not just by the information, but by the passion with which he shared it. This reserved man became eloquent when speaking about things he cared for deeply. They were making their way back to the horses when the weather changed abruptly, as it often did in the mountains. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them a sharp drop in temperature and the first few flakes of snow. "We should head back," Quentin said, eyeing the sky with concern. "That storm's moving faster than I expected." By the time they mounted up, the snow was falling more heavily, driven by a biting wind. Quentin led them down a different trail, more direct but also steeper. "Stay close," he called over his shoulder. "This path can be tricky even in good weather." Sarah followed carefully, trusting her mount's sure-footedness and Quentin's knowledge of the terrain. The snow thickened around them, reducing visibility and muffling sounds. The temperature continued to drop, and Sarah was grateful for the heavy coat Quentin had insisted she wear despite the morning sunshine. They had descended perhaps halfway, when Sarah's horse suddenly stumbled on a slick patch of rock hidden beneath the snow. The mare recovered quickly, but the movement dislodged a section of loose shale, sending it sliding down the steep slope. Sarah pulled up sharply, her heart pounding. Quentin was beside her in an instant, his hand reaching out to steady her reins. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she managed, though her voice shook slightly. "The path seems to be getting worse." Quentin surveyed the trail ahead, his expression grim. "It's not safe to continue this way. There's a line cabin about half a mile east of here. We should wait out the worst of this storm there." The decision made, Quentin led them carefully off the main trail and across a gentler slope. The snow was falling so heavily now that Sarah could barely see him riding a few yards ahead. She focused on the dark shape of his back, trusting him to find their shelter. The cabin appeared suddenly through the curtain of white, a small, solid structure built of logs, with a steep roof designed to shed snow. Quentin dismounted quickly, helping Sarah down before leading both horses to a lean-to shelter attached to the side of the cabin. Inside, the cabin was basic but sound: one room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a narrow bed, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Quentin moved efficiently, starting a fire while Sarah shook the snow from their coats. "All the line cabins are kept stocked," he explained, placing kindling beneath larger logs. For exactly this sort of situation, weather changes fast in these mountains. As the fire caught and began to warm the small space, Sarah realized the gravity of their situation. They were alone, miles from the ranch in what was rapidly becoming a serious early snowstorm, and they might be here for hours, possibly overnight. Quentin seemed to read her thoughts. "I know this isn't ideal," he said, straightening from the fire. "But we should be safe here until the storm passes." "I trust your judgment," Sarah replied, and found she meant it completely. The storm showed no signs of abating as afternoon faded toward evening. Quentin prepared a simple meal from the cabin store's beans, jerky softened in hot water and hardtack. They ate by firelight, sitting at the small table, the wind howling outside. "I should check the horses," Quentin said when they'd finished. He pulled on his coat and disappeared into the storm, returning 10 minutes later with snow crusting his hat and shoulders. "They're fine, sheltered and fed." The evening stretched before them, and Sarah became acutely aware of their isolation and proximity. Propriety suggested they should maintain formality, but the intimate setting made such distance feel artificial. "Tell me about your family," she said as they settled in chairs near the fire. "You've mentioned your parents, but do you have siblings?" Quentin shook his head. "I was an only child. My mother had several miscarriages before and after me. How about you?" "Just my sister in San Francisco. Our parents died within a year of each other, father from pneumonia, mother from heart failure. Some said she died of grief, but I think it was more that she stopped fighting to stay healthy after he was gone. They were close then. Very. Theirs was a love match unusual in their social circle. My mother's family nearly disowned her for marrying a professor rather than the banker they'd chosen." Sarah smiled at the memory. "They never regretted it, though. Even in the leanest years, they had each other." Quentin stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "I've often wondered about that kind of bond. My parents respected each other, worked well together, but there wasn't much tenderness, I suppose, at least not that I ever saw." "And you? Have you never married?" Sarah asked, venturing into personal territory they'd not yet explored. "No." Quentin shifted slightly. "There were few eligible women when I was younger, and as the ranch grew I had little time for courting. By the time I might have considered it, I'd grown accustomed to my own company." He paused. "Or perhaps that's just the excuse I tell myself." "What do you mean?" He met her gaze directly. "I think perhaps I was waiting, without knowing exactly what or who I was waiting for." The weight of his words hung in the space between them, charged with meaning. Sarah felt her heart quicken. "And you?" Quentin asked. "Why has no one claimed the hand of Malad City's schoolteacher?" Sarah looked down at her hands, considering her answer carefully. "I had a fiancé in Boston. Richard Pembroke, a fellow teacher at a boys' academy. We were to be married the summer I came west." "What happened?" "I received an offer to teach in Idaho territory. The salary was less than half what I made in Boston, the conditions described as primitive but improving. Richard was horrified when I wanted to accept." Sarah smiled ruefully. "He couldn't understand why I would choose hardship over comfort, isolation over society. We argued. I left. Sometimes I wonder if I made that choice to escape the marriage as much as to pursue the opportunity." "Do you regret it?" Quentin's voice was gentle. Sarah considered the question, looking around the rustic cabin, at the man sitting across from her so different from the polished, verbose Richard. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. The path hasn't been what I expected, but it led me here." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement of feelings growing beyond friendship or professional respect. "Sarah," Quentin began, his voice low and serious. A sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin's shutters, breaking the moment. Quentin rose to check that everything was secure, and when he returned, he kept a careful distance. "It's getting late," he said. "You should take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." Sarah wanted to protest, to return to the intimacy of moments before, but propriety reasserted itself. "Thank you," she said instead. "Wake me if you need to rest as well." Sleep came slowly, despite her physical exhaustion. Sarah lay in the narrow bed, listening to Quentin's quiet movements as he tended the fire, acutely aware of his presence in the small cabin. When sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with swirling snow and warm, firelit conversations. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Sarah awoke to find Quentin already outside, clearing a path to the lean-to where the horses waited. After a quick breakfast of coffee and the remaining hardtack, they set out for the ranch, following a route Quentin deemed safer given the fresh snow. The world around them was transformed, trees laden with white, familiar landscapes, rendered new and magical by the blanket of snow. They rode mostly in silence, both processing the subtle shift in their relationship that had occurred during their sheltered night. When they reached the ranch, they were met with relief bordering on jubilation. Rosa hugged Sarah fiercely, scolding Quentin in rapid Spanish for worrying them all. Miguel reported that they'd been preparing a search party when the storm finally broke. "We were perfectly safe," Quentin assured them. "The line cabin served its purpose." Still, the experience had heightened everyone's awareness that winter was approaching in earnest. Work on the schoolhouse accelerated, with every able-bodied man on the ranch pitching in during spare hours. 2 weeks after the snowstorm, the building was complete enough to use, though finishing touches would continue through the winter. The day the school officially opened was crisp and bright, the mountains freshly dusted with snow but the valley floor still clear. Quentin had arranged a small celebration not just for the children and their families, but for everyone who had contributed to the building's creation. Tables were set up outside the new schoolhouse, laden with food prepared by Rosa and the other ranch wives. Before the feast began, Quentin called for everyone's attention. Standing on the schoolhouse steps, with Sarah beside him, he surveyed the gathered community workers, families, children, all looking to him with respect and expectation. 3 months ago, this was just an idea, he began, his deep voice carrying easily across the yard. Today, it's a reality not because of any one person, but because of all of you. This school represents our commitment to the future, to our children, to building something that will outlast us all. He turned slightly toward Sarah. And none of it would have been possible without Miss Blackburn, who took a chance on a rancher's promise and brought her expertise and passion to our community. We are fortunate beyond measure to have her with us. Sarah felt a blush rise to her cheeks as the crowd applauded. When they quieted, she stepped forward. "When I came to Idaho territory 3 years ago, I had dreams of making a difference through education. Along the way, I nearly lost sight of that dream." She glanced at Quentin, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Being here, seeing what we can accomplish when we truly value learning, has renewed my faith in that original purpose. I promise to do my very best for your children, and I thank you for this extraordinary opportunity." More applause followed, and then the celebration began in earnest food and drink. Music from 2 fiddles and a harmonica, children running and playing, adults chatting in groups, or joining impromptu dances on the hard, packed earth of the schoolyard. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah found moments to speak with parents about their children's progress, to show curious visitors the interior of the schoolhouse with its new desks and books, to thank the men who had worked so hard on its construction. Throughout it all, she was aware of Quentin moving through the crowd, a respected figure at the center of this community he had built. When the light began to fade, families started gathering their children and heading home. The ranch hands helped clear away tables and leftover food, many drifting toward the bunkhouse or their family cabins. Soon, only Sarah and Quentin remained, standing in the doorway of the schoolhouse, looking out at the valley as the first stars appeared. "You did it," Sarah said softly. "You built something remarkable here." "We did it," Quentin corrected. "Your presence has changed this place, Sarah, brought it to life in a way I didn't know it was missing." She turned to face him, struck by the openness in his expression. "Quentin." "There's something I need to say," he interrupted gently. "Something I've been wanting to tell you since that night in the line cabin." Sarah's heart quickened. "Yes, I'm not a man who forms attachments easily or speaks of feelings readily. But these past months, watching you with the children, seeing your determination and kindness, sharing conversations on my porch in the evening, I've come to care for you deeply." He took a breath. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know." Sarah studied his face in the fading light, the strong lines softened by vulnerability, the eyes that watched her with such careful hope. In that moment, she recognized what had been growing in her own heart, what had perhaps begun that morning at the edge of Malad City when he'd asked if she was having second thoughts. "I care for you too," she said simply. "More than I expected to, more than seems reasonable in such a short time." Relief and joy transformed his features. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, Quentin reached for her hand. When she allowed him to take it, his fingers warm around hers, he spoke again. "I don't want to rush you. We can take whatever time you need. But I hope you might consider a future here, not just as our teacher but as my partner, in all things." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming rightness of this moment. "I think I'd like that very much." Under a sky now filled with stars, Quentin drew her gently closer. Their first kiss was tender, a promise of deeper feeling, of a shared future neither had anticipated but both now embraced. Winter arrived in earnest soon after, blanketing the ranch in snow and turning the mountains into a white fortress around their valley. The schoolhouse proved as warm and sound as promised, with children arriving each morning by sled or on horseback, stamping snow from boots before settling at their desks. Quentin and Sarah's courtship progressed with the same steady intentionality that characterized everything at Diamond a Ranch. They shared dinners in the main house, rode together on clear days, read aloud to each other before the fire in the evenings. Quentin revealed a surprising love of poetry, while Sarah discovered a talent for storytelling that captivated both her students and her suitor. By Christmas, their engagement was official, announced at the ranch's holiday celebration to cheers and congratulations from workers and families alike. Rosa cried happy tears, declaring she'd been praying for this outcome since the day Sarah arrived. They were married in April, when the first wildflowers began to bloom in the valley. The ceremony took place in the schoolhouse, transformed for the occasion with ribbons and early spring blossoms. Miguel stood as Quentin's best man, while Alina served as Sarah's maid of honor. Students and ranch families filled the benches, and even a delegation from Malad City attended, including Mrs. Peterson from the cafe and Mrs. Finch, Sarah's former landlady. "Never seen Quentin Atwood look so happy," Mrs. Peterson whispered as the couple exchanged vows. "Like he's finally found what he was building toward all along." Spring eased into summer, and Diamond, a ranch, flourished under the combined care of its master and new mistress. Sarah continued teaching, but now she returned each evening to the main house, where she and Quentin were creating a home that balanced his quiet strength with her livelier spirit. One warm evening in late August, they sat together on the porch swing Quentin had built as a wedding present. The valley stretched before them, golden in the setting sun, cattle grazing peacefully in distant pastures. "You ever think about that morning in Malad City?" Sarah asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "When you found me at the edge of town." Quentin's arm tightened around her. "Often. I nearly didn't speak, nearly rode past, thinking it wasn't my place to interrupt your departure." "What made you stop?" He considered the question. "Something in the way you were standing, looking back but ready to move forward. I recognized the feeling." Sarah smiled, remembering. "Second thoughts," she murmured. "Were you having them?" "Second thoughts about leaving? No," she admitted. "But perhaps I was waiting for a reason to stay, a different path I couldn't see yet." Quentin turned to kiss her temple. "And did you find it, that different path?" Sarah looked up at the man who had become her husband, her partner, her home. "I did, and it led me exactly where I was meant to be." As darkness fell across the valley, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about the future, the school year about to begin, the improvements Quentin planned for the ranch, the family they hoped to create together. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, their voices echoing across the peaceful land of Diamond, a ranch, a home built on dreams, hard work, and the unexpected love that had blossomed when a woman standing at town limits looked back and a cowboy asked, "Second thoughts?"